The sun had barely risen when Commander Valen Blackwood, newly appointed Earth's ambassador to Zorathis, found himself trekking through the rough terrain of an alien world. His black armored suit, heavy and restrictive, clung to his skin, its weight growing unbearable under the scorching heat of Celestia's twin suns. The air was thick with the scent of alien flora, strange and pungent, while the rhythmic crunch of his boots on the rocky ground was the only sound accompanying him. Each step felt like a small battle against both the weight of his gear and the oppressive heat. As an ambassador, Valen was prepared for diplomacy, smooth talk, policy negotiations, and handshakes across conference tables. But nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for the wild, raw beauty of Zorathis or the unexpected turn his mission would take. The planet was a world of extremes, where ancient traditions and cutting-edge technology coexisted in a delicate balance. The stark cliffs that rose from the landscape shimmered under the dual suns, and in the distance, the pools of hot springs exhaled steam into the sky, giving the world an ethereal glow. The Celestians, as Valen had learned in his briefing, were deeply rooted in their traditions, some of which felt as alien as the planet itself. Despite their advanced technology, their social systems were dictated by ancient laws, almost sacred in their importance. These laws governed everything from diplomacy to the most intimate aspects of life. Valen had learned enough to know that a misstep, even an innocent one, could lead to an international incident, especially when it came to their sacred traditions. It was in the middle of this rugged alien terrain, as Valen neared a secluded hot spring, that his diplomatic mission veered sharply from its intended course. His eyes caught a glimpse of movement in the steam rising from the spring ahead. He froze, his breath catching in his throat. At first, he thought it was a trick of the mist, but as the figure became clearer, his mind took a moment to process the unexpected scene. A woman, pale-skinned and radiant, stood in the sacred water. Her long, dark hair cascaded down her back, and her lithe form shimmered in the steam like a vision from another world. The shock of the moment struck him like a thunderclap. His first instinct was to look away, out of respect, out of instinct, but before he could, their eyes locked. For an eternal second, time seemed to stretch. Her eyes, dark and unblinking, met his with a shock of recognition, her gaze cutting through the mists as if they were the only two beings in the world. And then, the moment shattered. She reached for a white towel, draping it around her body with swift grace, but the damage had already been done. Valen's heart raced as he tried to process what he had just witnessed. In that brief, fleeting instant, he had violated something sacred, something ancient. "You have seen me unclothed," she said, her voice steady but edged with an authority that left no room for doubt. "By the laws of our people, there are only two paths forward, marriage or death." Valen's jaw dropped. This had to be a mistake. This couldn't be real. I didn't mean to," he began, but she cut him off, her voice carrying a weight far beyond any diplomatic protocol he had encountered. "There are no accidents when it comes to matters of honor," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "You must either marry me, or we both face execution at sunset." In any other scenario, Valen might have laughed off such an absurdity. But here, on Zorathis, these laws were absolute, part of a system centuries old. The shocking collision of Valen's earthly pragmatism with the raw, uncompromising laws of Celestian society was not only a clash of cultures but a trial by fire. Valen stood frozen, trying to comprehend the magnitude of what was happening. He was Earth's ambassador, a trained diplomat with years of experience, yet here, at the heart of an alien world, none of his skills could prevent a seemingly innocent misstep from spiraling into disaster. "I'm a diplomat," he stammered, his voice rising with the disbelief of it all. "I can't just." Her eyes softened slightly, but the firmness in her posture remained. "I know who you are, Commander Valen. But there is no room for negotiation when it comes to our laws. You must decide, either you become my mate, or we both face the consequences." He wanted to argue, wanted to protest that this was some sort of cultural misunderstanding, but there was something in her expression, something raw and real, that made him hesitate. In that moment, Valen felt the weight of the situation. This wasn't just a cultural faux pas, this was a matter of life and death, bound by a history far older than either of them. But even as the panic set in, a strange feeling stirred within him. It wasn't just fear. There was something else, something about this woman, her calmness in the face of danger, her aura of strength, and perhaps, the mystery of her world, that tugged at him. His initial shock was slowly replaced by something else, something inexplicable. He knew he was in over his head, yet he couldn't help but feel drawn to her. For a moment, silence fell between them, the distant sounds of the planet's wind and the soft hum of the sacred spring filling the air. And then, without another word, the woman, Aria, motioned for him to follow. "We must move quickly," she said, her voice urgent now. "The temple guard will be here soon. You must come with me." In the blink of an eye, Valen's diplomatic mission shifted from being about trade negotiations to navigating the treacherous waters of cultural law, honor, and survival. What had started as a formal visit had now become a matter of personal and political consequence. But in the midst of all the chaos and confusion, a quiet understanding began to form between him and Aria. Was it fate that had led him here? Or was it simply an accident? Either way, their journey together was about to take an unexpected turn. As they hurried through the rocky terrain, the stakes grew ever higher. Valen's thoughts swirled in a haze of confusion, but one thing was clear, he had no choice but to follow her. And with each step they took, their paths intertwined in ways neither could have foreseen. Aria's presence was commanding, yet there was something gentle in the way she guided him. She moved with the fluidity of someone who had spent years navigating the sacred landscape, her every step purposeful, even as she led him into uncharted territory. The path grew narrower, the cliffs around them rising higher, as they made their way toward the hidden caves that would offer them temporary refuge from the temple guard. As they ducked into the shadows, hidden from view, Valen couldn't shake the feeling that something far greater than a simple diplomatic mission had begun, something ancient, something primal, and, perhaps, something destined. And in that moment, as Aria turned to him with a look that was part concern, part resolve, Valen understood that this was no longer just about survival. It was about something deeper, something he couldn't yet name. The transition from political duty to survival is abrupt, but it's also where we see the true potential for connection. Valen's initial shock gives way to curiosity, and as they move further into this alien world together, his understanding of the Celestian culture and of Aria herself will evolve. The seeds of something more than just duty are being planted. Their alliance, born from necessity, began to grow into something far more complex. It was impossible to ignore the palpable chemistry between them, the way their gazes would lock for just a second too long, the way her voice, so clear and controlled, seemed to calm his racing mind. Each moment spent together added layers to the growing connection, and despite the gravity of their situation, there was a tension that neither could deny. What is it about the heat of danger that draws two people together? Is it the shared challenge of survival, or something deeper? This is where their story shifts from mere survival to something more, a mutual respect, a curiosity, and perhaps, the beginning of something truly meaningful. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and mineral-rich steam as Valen trudged forward, the weight of his armored suit pressing down on him with every step. The rocky terrain was unforgiving, jagged cliffs jutting out like the bones of some long-dead beast. Zorathis' twin suns beat down on him, casting a harsh light that intensified the already unbearable heat. Sweat clung to his brow, dripping down into his thick, dark beard, a constant reminder of how out of place he felt on this foreign planet. The Celestian landscape was unlike anything he had ever seen, its rugged beauty almost overwhelming. The cliff faces shimmered under the twin suns, reflecting a golden hue that seemed to make the very stones alive. Far below, the pools of hot springs bubbled, sending thin tendrils of steam curling up into the air like the breath of some ancient beast. The guide who had led him here, a stoic Celestian man who spoke in cryptic phrases, had mentioned that these springs held religious significance for his people, but he'd been frustratingly vague about the specifics. Cultural sensitivity, Valen reminded himself, his thoughts a jumble as his eyes scanned the rocky path ahead. The Celestians, he knew, were a people of strict traditions, laws that had withstood centuries, unbroken by the hands of time or progress. To them, every action, every glance, every word carried weight. This mission, which had seemed so straightforward in the briefings, was quickly becoming something far more complicated. One wrong move could spark an interplanetary incident. The thought lingered in his mind like a shadow as he wiped the sweat from his face, the weight of his duty pressing on him with a heavy, unrelenting force. As he rounded a sharp bend in the path, the sound of splashing water broke through his thoughts. His steps faltered as his eyes instinctively sought out the source. The mist rising from the hot springs ahead caught his attention, thick, swirling clouds that obscured the view. There, just beyond the steam, he caught a glimpse of something, a figure, pale and ethereal, standing in the water. The woman's long, dark hair cascaded down her back like liquid silk, her skin glowing softly in the light of the twin suns. For a moment, Valen thought it was a mirage, the heat of the planet playing tricks on his mind. But no, she was real. Too real. His breath hitched in his chest as he realized, with a jolt of horror, that the woman was naked, completely unaware of his presence. His heart raced, the heat of embarrassment flooding his face. Instinctively, he turned to leave, but it was too late. Their eyes locked. The moment seemed to stretch into eternity. Valen's mind froze, his body locked in place as her gaze pierced through him, as if she could see into the very core of who he was. It was a fleeting moment, only a few seconds, yet it felt like an eternity. And then, just as quickly, the woman reacted. In one smooth, practiced motion, she grabbed a white towel and wrapped it around her body, her face flushed with a mixture of shock and urgency. But the damage was done. Before Valen could gather his thoughts, her voice rang out, clear and commanding, carrying across the steam with an authority that left him momentarily speechless. "You have seen me unclothed," she declared, her tone firm, her expression a mixture of alarm and steel. "By the laws of our people, there are only two paths forward, marriage or death." Valen's mouth went dry. His eyes widened in disbelief. The words didn't quite register at first, as if the weight of what she said had yet to fully sink in. He opened his mouth to protest, to explain that it had been a simple mistake, an accident, but the woman cut him off, her gaze unwavering, her voice unyielding. "There are no accidents when it comes to matters of honor," she continued, her eyes now narrowing with intensity. "The law is clear. You must either become my mate, or we both face execution at sunset." Valen felt the blood drain from his face. He opened his mouth again, desperate to reason with her, but his words caught in his throat. This was insane. This couldn't be happening. He was a diplomat, trained to handle political crises, to smooth over misunderstandings with tact and diplomacy. But this? This was beyond any negotiation he had ever encountered. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered, still trying to make sense of it all. "I didn't mean to." She raised her hand, cutting him off. "I know what you meant," she said, her voice softening slightly, though the gravity of the situation still hung in the air. "But the law is the law. You've seen me in my most vulnerable state. There is no undoing it." Her words were final, as though there was no room for compromise. Valen's mind raced, trying to piece together a solution, but everything seemed to slip through his fingers. In this world, this alien world, there were no simple solutions. There were only laws. Laws that could bind him to a complete stranger in an instant, or sentence both of them to death. The woman's face softened for a moment, but the urgency in her eyes never faded. She took a step closer to him, her expression conflicted, caught between duty and something else, something Valen couldn't quite place. "I must warn you," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "If you do not choose, the guards will be upon us soon. And the decision will be made for us." Her words hit him like a hammer. His pulse quickened, his mind spinning as he realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just some misunderstanding anymore. He had stumbled into a place where the laws were as old as the stars themselves, and to defy them would be to risk everything. As the distant sound of approaching footsteps reached his ears, the woman, the Celestian, turned, motioning for him to follow. "We must move quickly," she said, her voice urgent once again, a strange mixture of calm and fear in her words. "The temple guard will be here soon. You must come with me." Valen hesitated for a moment, his thoughts swirling, but then something inside him clicked. There was no time for hesitation. His diplomatic training told him to keep his head, to keep cool, but here, in this alien world, he realized that sometimes, no amount of diplomacy could solve the problem at hand. Sometimes, you had to act. He took a deep breath, steadying himself as he stepped forward, following the woman into the mist. It's fascinating how quickly things can shift when culture and tradition become the ultimate authority. Valen's world, shaped by protocols and political structures, is suddenly thrown into turmoil by a culture that places honor and law above everything else. What makes this encounter even more compelling is how quickly it turns into something deeply personal, a moment of connection, however accidental, that changes everything. It's a reminder that, no matter how advanced a civilization is, the laws of the heart are often the most binding. Valen followed Aria through the rocky terrain, his mind still spinning from the encounter at the sacred spring. The silence between them was thick, heavy with the weight of the law that had just been imposed upon him. The gravity of the situation slowly began to settle in, and with it, a rising sense of dread. He was no longer merely an Earth ambassador on a diplomatic mission. He was now entangled in something far deeper, something far older than anything he had ever imagined. Aria moved with purpose, her steps confident and fluid, as though she had walked these paths 1,000 times before. Valen, on the other hand, stumbled slightly, the unfamiliarity of the landscape and the heavy weight of his armor slowing his movements. The path they followed wound through jagged cliffs and twisting caves, the air growing cooler as they ventured deeper into the rocky heart of Zorathis. The low hum of distant springs filled the air, their steam rising in soft clouds that seemed to blanket everything in an ethereal mist. The tension between them hung like a tangible force. Valen's mind raced, desperately searching for a way out of this impossible situation. He had been thrust into the middle of an alien culture, a culture where the laws were not just rules, they were sacred mandates, governing everything from personal conduct to the very essence of existence. There was no room for negotiation, no space for misunderstanding. The Celestians were a people bound by the unyielding chains of their traditions, and in their world, honor and duty were more important than life itself. As they reached the base of the cliffs, Aria finally spoke, her voice softer now, though still filled with an undeniable authority. "You must understand," she began, her words measured and deliberate, "our laws are ancient. They predate even our understanding of the stars. These are not mere rules, they are the foundation upon which our society stands. To violate them, even accidentally, is to violate the very fabric of who we are." Valen listened in silence, trying to make sense of her words. He had always understood the importance of cultural sensitivity in diplomacy, but nothing could have prepared him for the sheer weight of Celestian law. Back on Earth, laws were malleable, subject to debate, change, and interpretation. Here, there was no room for discussion. The law was as immutable as the very land beneath their feet. "I never meant to disrespect your laws," Valen said, his voice thick with frustration. "I didn't know." "You could not have known," Aria interrupted, her tone more empathetic now, though there was no mistaking the seriousness of her words. "But in Celestian culture, there are no accidents. Our traditions are built upon the belief that everything, every action, every gesture, has meaning. You saw me in a place that is sacred to my people. That act, however unintentional, has set in motion a chain of events that cannot be undone." Valen's brow furrowed as he processed her words. He could see the logic in them, though it was alien to his own way of thinking. On Earth, a simple mistake could be corrected. There were always ways to make amends, to apologize, to fix what had been broken. But here, in the world of the Celestians, there was no such luxury. The law was absolute. The sacred springs, Aria continued, her voice growing distant as she spoke of the place they had just left, are not just a place for purification. They are where the truth of one's soul is revealed. When you saw me there, you did not just see my body, you saw me, in my most vulnerable form. To look upon me in that way is to be bound to me, in ways that no words can explain. Valen felt a chill run down his spine at the weight of her words. It was as though the very laws of her people were woven into the fabric of the universe, governing everything with an unyielding hand. To violate those laws was to reject the very essence of what it meant to be Celestian. And yet, here he was, an outsider, caught in the middle of a sacred law he could not begin to understand. He had been trained to handle political situations with ease, to navigate the complexities of different cultures with a steady hand. But this was different. This wasn't a matter of trade deals or diplomatic protocol. This was a matter of life and death. A matter of truth. You still don't understand, do you? Aria's voice broke through his thoughts. In our culture, honor is everything. It is the thread that binds us all together. To see someone in their most vulnerable state, to witness the truth of their soul, is to form a bond that cannot be undone, not by law, not by time, not by any force in the universe. To reject that bond is to reject the truth, and to reject the truth is to invite death. Valen's heart raced as her words sank in. He had not been prepared for this. He had known that diplomacy could be complicated, but this was something entirely different. He was caught between two worlds, each governed by its own set of laws, its own set of beliefs. And in the world of the Celestians, there was no room for compromise. There was only the law. What happens now? Valen asked, his voice strained as he faced the reality of his situation. If I refuse, if I don't agree to this marriage, what will happen to us? Aria paused, her expression unreadable for a moment. Then, with a deep sigh, she answered. If you refuse, we will both die. There is no alternative. The law is clear. The sacred springs have spoken, and they will not be ignored. Valen's thoughts swirled in a haze of confusion. The weight of the decision before him felt like a crushing burden. He had been thrust into a world where honor, tradition, and law were not just concepts, they were the very fabric of life itself. And now, that same fabric was demanding that he make a choice that would alter the course of his life, and perhaps the lives of his people, forever. This is where the real heart of the story lies. In Valen's struggle to understand, we see the clash of two cultures, one grounded in flexibility and the other in immovable tradition. It's fascinating how Aria explains her people's laws not as arbitrary rules but as the foundation of their very existence. For Celestians, tradition is not just about maintaining the status quo, it's about maintaining the truth of their existence. For Valen, everything he has known is being upended by a law that feels foreign, rigid, and unyielding. Yet, within this clash, we begin to see the seeds of understanding being planted. Aria's calm acceptance of the law contrasts sharply with Valen's sense of disbelief. But, in a way, this moment is a turning point, not just for Valen, but for both of them. It's the moment when two worlds begin to merge, and the foundations of their relationship, however rocky and uncertain, start to take shape. As they continued to move through the labyrinth of caves, Valen's mind raced with 1,000 questions. He couldn't understand everything, couldn't reconcile the strictness of Celestian law with his own beliefs. But one thing was becoming clearer, this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about something far more complex. This was about truth, honor, and perhaps, even destiny. The cave they had taken refuge in was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the relentless heat of Zorathis' twin suns. Valen stood still, his heart still pounding in his chest as the weight of the situation settled in around him. Every inch of his mind screamed to find a way out, to escape from this impossible cultural tangle and somehow return to the safety of Earth. But as the sound of footsteps drew nearer, echoing across the rock-strewn path outside, he realized that there was no simple solution, no escape from the laws of this alien world. Aria, however, remained composed. It was as if the chaos of the moment had no hold over her, her every move was measured, deliberate. She peered cautiously through the gap in the cave entrance, her dark eyes scanning the path beyond with the calm of someone who had navigated far more dangerous situations than Valen could ever imagine. "We don't have much time," she whispered, her voice low but urgent. "The guards will be here soon. We need to move quickly, or we'll both be caught." Valen barely had time to absorb her words before Aria moved with practiced ease, slipping into the shadows. She motioned for him to follow, her presence as silent and steady as the mountain winds outside. As he moved after her, Valen couldn't help but notice how different she was from anyone he had ever encountered, her poise, her calmness, the way she seemed to carry herself with the certainty of someone who had always been in control. Even in the face of death, she acted as if it was just another obstacle to be navigated. But Valen wasn't like her. He wasn't used to navigating life and death situations with the same detached grace. He had spent years as a diplomat, negotiating with politicians, but this was entirely different. It was a personal, cultural trap that he had wandered into, and now, everything was hanging in the balance. His entire mission to Zorathis had become a matter of life and death, and he was caught at the center of it. They moved swiftly, their footsteps barely making a sound on the rocky path. The winding trails took them deeper into the heart of the cliffs, and Valen began to notice the beauty in the landscape. Strange plants, with vivid flowers and glowing foliage, crept along the edges of the path, adding an otherworldly hue to the scene. The sheer cliffs above them towered like silent sentinels, casting deep shadows over the land below. It was as if the planet itself were watching, its ancient laws stretching out through the very earth they walked on. As they rounded a corner, the sound of distant voices drifted toward them, low and guttural, more temple guards. Aria's pace quickened, and Valen found himself struggling to keep up with her. Despite the weight of his armor, despite the disorientation of the situation, he could not deny the strange pull he felt toward her. It wasn't just the fear of execution or the chaos of their situation that kept him moving forward, it was the deep, inexplicable connection that had already begun to form between them. Aria glanced back at him over her shoulder, catching his eye for a brief moment. The intensity of her gaze sent a shiver down his spine. There was something unspoken between them, something that transcended language and protocol, something raw and real that neither of them could deny. But now was not the time to explore those feelings. "We have to hide," she said urgently, leading him toward a narrow crevice in the rocks, barely wide enough for them both to squeeze through. They crouched down inside, the shadows of the cave cloaking them from view. The cool air inside the crevice was a relief from the stifling heat of the planet, but the tension between them was palpable, thick in the small space. For a moment, they were still, listening to the approaching footsteps of the guards. Valen's mind raced. How had it come to this? One simple mistake, one accidental glance, and now he was in a cave, hiding from the very people he was supposed to be negotiating with. This was no longer just about diplomacy. This was about survival, and in that moment, survival meant placing his trust in someone he barely knew, someone whose laws were as alien to him as the planet itself. The voices grew louder as the guards neared. Valen could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the adrenaline making every sound around him sharper, more intense. He strained to listen, trying to make out what they were saying. "Did you see her?" one of the guards asked, his voice filled with suspicion. "The daughter of the High Counselor, alone in the sacred springs? With a human male? She must have been meditating," another guard replied, his tone less convinced. "But if it's true, the penalty." Valen's breath caught in his throat. They were talking about Aria, about her. And now, they were hunting for him, hunting for both of them. The stakes had escalated, and now, it wasn't just about getting caught, it was about the very life of the woman who had unknowingly bound him to her fate. Aria's eyes met his once again, this time with a look that was filled with quiet resolve. She knew, as did Valen, that they had no choice but to play their parts. In this world, there was no room for hesitation. There was only survival. "I'll handle this," she whispered, her voice low but full of determination. Before Valen could respond, she slid out of their hiding place with the grace of a shadow, her figure barely visible in the dim light. He barely had time to react before she was gone, her presence swallowed by the cavernous expanse. Valen's heart raced as he crouched in the shadows, his mind torn between following her or staying hidden. The sound of footsteps grew closer, the guards now just around the corner. But then, a voice, Aria's voice, rose above the murmurs of the approaching guards. "Captain Thawne." Aria called, her tone filled with indignation, the words sharp and precise. "You dare accuse me of such a thing? I've been here for hours, performing my purification rituals. A human male would never dare to intrude upon this sacred moment." Valen held his breath as the guards hesitated. The moment stretched into eternity. The silence seemed endless, as if the very air held its breath in anticipation. He couldn't see Aria from his vantage point, but he could hear the authority in her voice, the confidence that came from someone who had grown up under the weight of these traditions. It was clear to Valen that she was no ordinary Celestian. She wasn't just the daughter of a high counselor, she was someone who understood the game of politics and power, someone who had learned how to navigate a world built on centuries of laws. And now, she was using that knowledge to protect both of them. Valen had never been one to believe in fate or destiny. He'd been taught to rely on logic, to rely on reason, to think of everything in terms of diplomacy and strategy. But here, in the heart of Zorathis, logic seemed to evaporate like mist in the warm wind. He had violated a sacred law, a law so ancient that even the stars above had not witnessed its birth, and yet, standing there in the cold cave, with Aria by his side, he found himself questioning everything he had ever known. The connection between them was undeniable, and yet it felt so impossible, so foreign. It wasn't just the law that bound them now, it was something deeper, something that neither of them could ignore. He watched Aria as she moved through the darkness, the ethereal glow of her skin almost glowing in the dim light. Her long, dark hair framed her face like the shadows themselves, and for the first time since meeting her, Valen couldn't look away. There was something mesmerizing about her, something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't just the beauty of her form, the grace with which she moved, or even the sharpness in her eyes. It was the strength within her. The quiet power that came from knowing who she was, even in the face of a world that demanded so much from her. Despite the complexity of their situation, despite the life-or-death nature of it all, there was something else beginning to form between them, something raw, unspoken, and electric. Aria, sensing the shift, stopped just ahead, turning to face him with a look that made Valen's pulse quicken. The way she held his gaze was not one of command, but one of understanding, as if she had seen him, truly seen him, at his most vulnerable. In that moment, all the formalities of diplomacy, all the rigid protocols of their respective worlds, melted away. "You're still thinking of escape, aren't you?" Aria's voice was soft but laced with something sharper beneath. It wasn't accusation, but something akin to curiosity, as if she were searching for the truth of his thoughts. Valen hesitated. His diplomatic mind wanted to respond with logic, to find a way out, to offer a solution that would get them both out of this mess. But in the face of her penetrating gaze, he found his words caught in his throat. "I'm thinking about how impossible this situation is," he said quietly, the rawness in his voice surprising even him. "How I'm a diplomat, not someone who falls into these kinds of situations." Aria took a step closer, her gaze never leaving his. The soft glow from her skin seemed to draw him in, as though she had become a part of the very light around them, pulling him deeper into her world. "You're not just a diplomat anymore," she said, her voice low and intimate. "You're a man caught in a law that will bind you to me, whether you like it or not." Valen's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't just the weight of the law that hung in the air now, it was something far more personal. He couldn't help but notice the way her lips curved slightly, as if she knew the power of the moment. The way the distance between them had closed, not just physically, but emotionally. In her eyes, he could see the same understanding, the same tension that churned inside him. "But I didn't mean to see you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "I didn't want to be caught up in this." Her expression softened, and for the first time, he saw something vulnerable in her. Something that made her seem human in a way that was completely unexpected. "I know," she replied, her voice tinged with something almost sorrowful. "But now that it's happened, there is no turning back. The law will claim us, whether we want it or not." He felt his heart race, not from the urgency of their situation, but from the proximity of her, the heat radiating from her skin, the scent of something floral and intoxicating that seemed to cling to the air. She was so close now that he could feel the warmth of her breath against his cheek. The physical closeness, the intensity of their shared space, was undeniable. "You're right," Valen said, the words slipping out before he could stop them. "There's no turning back now. But that doesn't make it easier. I'm a man of reason, Aria. I rely on logic, on structure. This defies all of that." And yet, he paused, struggling to find the right words, struggling to make sense of what he was feeling. "And yet, I can't deny the connection I feel to you. Even in the middle of all this madness. It's like something beyond the law, beyond tradition, is pulling me toward you." Aria's gaze softened even more, and for a moment, she seemed to lose herself in the intensity of the moment, the silence between them thickening. Slowly, deliberately, she reached out, her hand brushing lightly against his arm. The touch was like a spark, igniting a fire within him that he couldn't extinguish. Her touch was gentle but full of intent, as though she were marking her territory, claiming this moment for herself and for him. "It's the truth, Valen," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Our laws are not just about tradition. They are about truth. The sacred springs reveal the truth of who we are. And what I saw in you that day, what the springs revealed, was not just an accidental glance. It was something deeper." Valen felt a shiver run through him, a tremor that began in his chest and spread outward. The way she spoke, the way she looked at him, it was as if she were reading him, understanding him in a way that no one else had before. It was a connection that transcended culture, that defied the cold, unyielding laws that governed their worlds. "I'm starting to understand that," Valen murmured, his voice rough. "But it's not just the law anymore, is it? It's not just about avoiding execution or becoming your mate because the law demands it. There's something else here. Something that neither of us can deny." Aria took a slow step closer, her lips barely an inch from his. "Yes," she whispered, her voice hushed with intensity. "There's something else. Something more powerful than the law. Something that has been written in the stars long before we were born." And then, without another word, she closed the distance between them, her lips brushing against his with a kiss that was as soft as it was fiery. It wasn't just a kiss born of duty or necessity, it was a kiss that spoke of everything unspoken between them. The electric tension, the fear, the desire, the understanding, all of it was poured into that single moment. Valen's mind raced as he deepened the kiss, his body responding to hers without thought. For the first time since his arrival on Zorathis, everything else faded away. The law, the cultural misunderstandings, the consequences of their actions, none of it mattered anymore. There was only this moment. Only the truth of their connection, raw and unfiltered. When they finally pulled apart, their breaths mingling in the cool air of the cave, Valen could see the shift in Aria's expression. The intensity in her eyes had not waned, if anything, it had only deepened. They were no longer bound by the law alone. They were bound by something far more powerful. "You were right," Valen said softly, his voice thick with emotion. "I didn't just stumble into this. I was meant to be here. To be with you." Aria nodded, her hand gently tracing the line of his jaw. "Yes," she whispered. "You were meant to see me. And now, we must face what comes next. Together." The shift from necessity to something deeper is powerful here. In this moment, Valen and Aria stop being just two individuals caught in a cultural conflict, they become something greater, something more connected. Their kiss is a symbol of that connection, a declaration that love and truth transcend the boundaries of law and tradition. In a way, their romance is the most radical act of all, choosing to follow their hearts, even when the world around them demands otherwise. The cave was quiet now, the faint hum of distant springs carrying on the wind. Valen stood by Aria, his mind still reeling from the intensity of their shared moment. The kiss that had ignited something between them, something primal, raw, and undeniable, had left a charge in the air, lingering like an electric current. But as the moment began to settle, another reality began to sink in. They were still trapped within the confines of an ancient law. They were still bound by a destiny neither of them had chosen. Yet there was something else. Something that neither of them had expected, something that would change the course of everything. Aria's eyes met his again, their depths unreadable. She looked different now, more than just the daughter of a high counselor, more than just a woman caught in the web of her people's laws. There was something more in her gaze, something that felt almost familiar. "Do you know what the sacred springs revealed that day?" she asked quietly, her voice soft but tinged with an edge of something almost secretive. Valen blinked, confused. "What do you mean?" Aria took a step closer to him, her gaze never leaving his, her dark eyes filled with something he couldn't quite place. "When you saw me, when you witnessed my truth, it wasn't just a glance, Valen. It wasn't just a violation of the laws of my people." She paused, taking a breath, as if gathering herself before saying something she wasn't entirely sure she should. "The springs, they revealed something deeper. Something more than just an accident. They showed a connection between us, one that transcends the boundaries of our species, of our cultures." Valen's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the words she was about to say hanging in the air, thick with meaning, but he couldn't fully grasp them. His mind was still trying to catch up to the implications of what had already happened between them, the kiss, the bond, the truth of the law, and now, Aria was saying something even more unfathomable. "You mean, the law, it wasn't just about honor?" he asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It was about us?" Aria nodded slowly, her lips curving into a small, almost secretive smile. "Yes. The law is not just about tradition. It is about truth. And the truth revealed by the sacred springs, when you saw me, it wasn't just my body you saw. You saw my soul. And when you saw me, something within you shifted. Something you couldn't understand at first, but something real nonetheless. Something that even the elders of my people could not predict." Valen's mind raced. He had seen the fear in Aria's eyes when they first met. He had felt the raw tension between them when the law had been laid bare. But now, standing in the cool shadows of the cave, he could sense a deeper connection, one that wasn't just dictated by law, but by something far more profound. "It's not just the law that binds us," Aria continued, her voice gentle now, but filled with an undeniable conviction. "There's something else, Valen. Something that my people have long suspected, but never fully understood. Celestians, as a species, have always believed that our souls are intertwined with the truth of the universe. We believe that when two beings from different worlds meet, truly meet, there is a bond formed that goes beyond law, beyond tradition. A bond that links our very essence together." Valen stood still, trying to process her words. This wasn't just about laws or culture anymore. This was something deeper, something he couldn't explain, but felt in the very marrow of his bones. He had come to Zorathis as an outsider, a diplomat, someone trying to represent his people. But now, he was beginning to realize that he was part of something much larger, something that had been written into the fabric of the universe long before he had ever set foot on this alien world. "You're saying, our souls are connected?" he asked, his voice a whisper, as though speaking the words aloud might make them too real. "That there's more to this than just the law?" Aria stepped closer to him, her expression shifting from one of uncertainty to something almost knowing. "Yes. The law that governs us, the traditions that bind us, those are only a reflection of the deeper truth. The truth that your soul and mine are intertwined. The truth that, by fate or by the will of the universe, our meeting was not an accident. It was destined. And that destiny cannot be undone. Valen felt his breath catch in his throat as her words sank in. The idea of destiny, of an invisible thread linking their souls, felt impossible. Yet, as he stood there, feeling the pulse of energy between them, this unspoken, unexplainable bond, he couldn't deny it. It was as if their very beings were resonating with each other, as if the world itself had conspired to bring them together. But how, he asked, struggling to understand. How can this be? I'm human. You're Celestian. How can our souls be connected when everything about us is so different? Aria's smile deepened, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her voice. Because, Valen, it's not the differences that matter. It's the similarities. We are both creatures of the universe, our souls made of the same cosmic stardust. Yes, we come from different worlds, different species, different cultures. But when you saw me, when you witnessed the truth of who I am, our souls recognized each other. And that recognition, that bond, is something more powerful than any law, any tradition. It's the very foundation of life itself. Valen's mind reeled, his thoughts tumbling over each other as he tried to grasp the full magnitude of what she was saying. He had come to Zorathis to represent Earth, to forge diplomatic relations with an alien species. But now, standing here with Aria, he realized that this mission, this moment, was about something far more profound than politics or diplomacy. It was about a connection that transcended the barriers of space, of species, of law. The springs, Valen whispered, as the pieces slowly began to fall into place. The truth that they revealed, it wasn't just about seeing you. It was about seeing us. Aria nodded, her eyes shining with a mixture of certainty and something deeper, something more vulnerable. Yes. The springs revealed a connection between us, one that has always existed, even if we didn't know it. Our people have always believed that true connection is not just physical. It is spiritual, cosmic. And when two beings find each other, truly find each other, it is a bond that cannot be broken. Not by law, not by time, not by anything. Valen's heart raced as he felt the truth of her words settle over him. It wasn't just the law that had brought them together, it was fate. And now, with that realization, everything had changed. This moment between Valen and Aria is a turning point, not just for them, but for the entire story. The idea of a soul connection, a bond that transcends the physical and the cultural, is a powerful one. It challenges everything we think we know about love and connection. This isn't just about two people being forced together by law. This is about something far deeper, something that exists beyond the constraints of their worlds. It's about destiny, about finding the person who resonates with you on a level that is impossible to explain. And for Valen and Aria, this is just the beginning of something that could change both their worlds forever. As they stood there, in the quiet of the cave, the air seemed to hum with the intensity of their connection. Valen knew that everything had shifted. He wasn't just a diplomat anymore. He wasn't just a man caught in a world of strange laws and customs. He was someone who had been irrevocably bound to another being, a being whose soul mirrored his own in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. And in that moment, as he looked into Aria's eyes, Valen knew that there was no turning back. They had crossed a threshold, and whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Their bond, forged by the sacred springs and the truth they revealed, was the beginning of something new, something powerful, something eternal. And in that shared silence, as the mist swirled around them, Valen took her hand, feeling the pulse of the universe itself resonate between them, a truth they could no longer deny. The journey from the cave had been silent, the weight of their shared secret hanging in the air between them like a palpable force. Valen and Aria moved in tandem, the faint hum of the distant springs now replaced by the oppressive stillness of the paths leading to the palace. Despite the chaos they had narrowly escaped, despite the truth they had just uncovered between them, the world around them was not going to simply let their bond grow in peace. The political landscape of Zorathis was a treacherous one, and it had already begun to shift, threatening to pull them in directions neither of them had anticipated. Aria, though calm in the face of the law's crushing weight, seemed more tense as they neared the palace gates. There was a noticeable shift in her demeanor, an undercurrent of worry that Valen had not seen in her before. Her usual composure, honed by years of navigating the intricate web of Celestian politics, had been replaced by something more urgent, more vulnerable. They reached the palace's outer gates, the towering crystal spires looming above them like frozen flames in the twilight, casting their long shadows over the path ahead. Aria's pace quickened, her eyes scanning the area, alert to every sound. The distant voices of palace servants and courtiers echoed through the corridors, but it wasn't the usual bustle of palace life that had her on edge. There was something else, something lurking beneath the surface that had set her on high alert. "Valen," she said, her voice low and tense, "there is something you need to understand. What we've just done, what we've just begun, it's not just between us. Our union will change everything. And there are those who will stop at nothing to see it fail." Valen raised an eyebrow, his hand instinctively tightening around the strap of his rifle. "What are you talking about?" Aria glanced around them, her expression becoming more guarded. "My father, High Counselor Lysander, is a man of tradition. He values the old ways, the laws, the structure of our society. But not all Celestians share that view. There are those in the High Court, in the noble houses, who see our union as a threat. They do not care about the truth of the springs or the bond between us. To them, this is a political maneuver, one that will shift the balance of power." Valen felt a sinking sensation in his stomach. "What do you mean, shift the balance of power?" "There are factions within Celestian society," Aria explained, her voice barely a whisper now, "powerful families and political figures who are entrenched in the old ways. They believe in maintaining the purity of Celestian bloodlines. The idea of a union with a human, a diplomat no less, disrupts their carefully laid plans for power. They see this as an act of rebellion against the natural order. And if they cannot control it, they will destroy it." Valen's mind raced. The implications of what Aria was saying were far more dangerous than he had anticipated. This wasn't just about their lives anymore, it was about the stability of two entire worlds, two civilizations on the brink of uniting, or tearing each other apart. "And who are these factions?" he asked, his voice low, the weight of the situation pressing down on him. "What do they want?" Aria's eyes darkened as she continued walking, her pace now matching his urgency. "Lord Cryan," she said, her voice thick with disdain. "He is one of the most influential figures in Celestian politics. He is a high-ranking noble, and his ambitions reach far beyond what is acceptable. He's been seeking an arranged marriage with me for years, an alliance that would strengthen his political influence, ensure the survival of his house's legacy. He does not care for the sacred springs. He does not care for the truth that binds us. He cares only for power." Valen's jaw tightened. The name Lord Cryan sounded familiar, his features flashing through the reports he had read before departing Earth. A man of considerable wealth and influence, Cryan had been involved in negotiations for trade agreements with Earth. He had been one of the primary figures Valen was supposed to meet with, though he had never imagined this would be the role Cryan would play. "And Cryan isn't the only one," Aria continued, her voice lowering even further. "There are others, lesser houses, military factions, and court advisors who are all tied to the old ways. They'll see our union as a direct challenge to everything they've worked for. They'll use every tool at their disposal to ensure that it's destroyed." Valen's thoughts flickered back to their earlier conversation, to the fear in Aria's eyes when she spoke of the temple guards. He could feel the weight of the stakes now, not just on a personal level, but on a political scale that far exceeded anything he had imagined. The more he learned about Celestian politics, the more he realized how little he truly understood. The power struggles, the ancient laws, the shifting alliances, it was a world so different from his own, and yet, he was now a part of it. Their relationship had already become a political weapon, one that was being fought over by those who had the power to shape the future of Zorathis. "We need to speak to your father," Valen said firmly, his voice filled with a new sense of urgency. "We need to get ahead of this, to ensure our position before it spirals out of control." Aria stopped suddenly, her hand gripping his arm to hold him in place. She turned to face him, her dark eyes filled with a storm of conflicting emotions. "You don't understand, Valen," she said, her voice shaking. "My father is not the ally you think he is. He is a man of tradition, yes, but he is also a man of power. He will not act unless it serves his interests. And right now, our union, our bond, is not something he will see as beneficial. He will see it as a political liability, a potential threat to the status quo. We cannot rely on him." Valen's mind raced. He had known from the beginning that this mission would involve more than just diplomacy. But he hadn't realized the depth of the political currents he was wading into. This wasn't just about navigating alliances and trade agreements. This was about survival. Their survival. "What do you suggest we do, then?" he asked, his voice tight with the pressure of the situation. "We can't just let this fester. We need a strategy, Aria. We need to neutralize Cryan and the others before they can use our relationship against us." Aria's eyes darkened with something like resolve. "I have a plan," she said quietly. "But it's dangerous. We will need to take risks. If we're to survive this, we need to play their game, but we need to do it on our terms. The political landscape is shifting around Valen and Aria, and with it comes the realization that their relationship is no longer just a matter of cultural misunderstanding or personal connection. It has become a battleground, one where the stakes are not just life and death, but the very future of both their worlds. This chapter introduces a crucial element of political intrigue, showing how their love story intersects with power struggles and hidden agendas. What's fascinating here is how their bond, which began as an accident, is now being weaponized, with forces far beyond their control trying to tear them apart. It's a reminder of the fragility of personal relationships in the face of political ambition. What will Valen and Aria choose? Will they be able to navigate the labyrinth of Celestian politics, or will the weight of tradition crush them? As their bond grows stronger, so too do the forces that seek to tear it down. As Aria led Valen through the palace halls, the magnitude of the political web they were tangled in became ever clearer. Hidden agendas, secret alliances, and dangerous rivalries swirled around them like a storm, each faction pulling in a different direction. But in that moment, as they walked side by side, Valen could feel something stirring between them, a shared resolve, a silent promise that they would face whatever came next together. No matter what the political landscape held in store, Valen knew one thing for sure: he was no longer just an ambassador for Earth. He was a player in a game much larger than he had ever expected, one where love, law, and politics collided in ways that would change everything. And with Aria by his side, he would fight to see their bond not just survive, but thrive. The real strength of their partnership is beginning to show. It's no longer just about surviving the law or the political maneuvering, it's about navigating the treacherous waters together. Both of them have had to make sacrifices, and both will need to rely on each other to succeed. The stakes have never been higher, and the world they are fighting for is one that neither of them could have predicted. The real question now isn't whether they can survive, it's whether they can outsmart the very forces trying to destroy them. The Grand Palace loomed ahead, its crystal spires reaching into the sky like frozen flames, casting long, jagged shadows across the ground. Valen's steps felt heavier as they approached, each footfall echoing in the vast silence that surrounded them. It was as if the palace itself was a living, breathing entity, watching them, waiting for their next move. The weight of the day, the narrow escape from the temple guards, the revelation of their connection, the unspoken bond between him and Aria, hung over them like a heavy shroud. As they crossed the threshold into the palace, Aria's pace slowed. She seemed lost in thought, her gaze distant, focused on something only she could see. Valen couldn't help but notice the subtle change in her demeanor. The calm, collected woman he had come to rely on now seemed to be carrying an invisible burden, one that weighed on her in ways he couldn't fully understand. "Where are we going?" Valen asked, his voice barely a whisper, as if the very walls of the palace could hear them. Aria didn't immediately answer, her eyes fixed ahead, the intensity of her thoughts visible in the lines of her face. Finally, she spoke, her voice low and tinged with something else, something that hinted at the gravity of what they were about to face. "We're going to see the oracle," she said, her tone betraying a mix of uncertainty and resolve. "She is the keeper of the sacred truths, the one who interprets the visions of the springs. If anyone can understand what the springs reveal to us, it is her." Valen's brow furrowed. He had heard of the oracle, an ancient figure, revered by the Celestians, said to possess the ability to see beyond the veil of time and space. But until now, he had not fully grasped the significance of her role. The springs, the sacred pools that had witnessed the moment of their union, were no ordinary place. To the Celestians, they were the gateway to truth, to the very essence of the universe itself. And now, he was about to meet the one who could interpret that truth. The corridors of the palace were lined with shimmering crystals that seemed to hum with a quiet energy, casting rainbow-like patterns on the walls as they passed. The further they walked, the more the air seemed to thrum with an otherworldly presence. It was as though the very structure of the palace was alive, breathing with the pulse of the springs, guiding them towards something inevitable. They arrived at a large, ornate chamber, its walls draped in flowing tapestries that shimmered with intricate designs, glowing softly in the ambient light. At the center of the room stood the oracle, a figure cloaked in flowing robes that seemed to absorb the light around her, her eyes clouded with an ancient wisdom that was both unsettling and awe-inspiring. Her presence filled the room, a silent force that radiated power and insight. She turned as they entered, her gaze settling on Aria with the calm of someone who had seen lifetimes unfold in the blink of an eye. There was no surprise in her expression, no recognition of the urgency that had brought them here. It was as if she had been expecting them all along. "You have come," the oracle said, her voice soft but carrying an undeniable weight. "I have seen the truth in the waters. The springs have spoken, and I know why you are here." Valen felt a shiver run down his spine. He had expected to hear something cryptic, something vague, but the oracle's words were precise, direct. There was no hesitation in her voice, no room for misinterpretation. She knew. And somehow, so did he. Aria stepped forward, her posture stiff but composed. "The springs revealed a connection between us," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "A bond that transcends law, tradition, and everything we have been taught to believe. What does it mean, Oracle? What is this truth we now share?" The oracle's gaze shifted to Valen, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made his breath catch in his throat. It was as though she could see straight through him, through the layers of his past, his fears, his doubts, and into the very heart of his soul. "The truth you seek is not just between you," the oracle intoned, her voice ringing with the weight of prophecy. "It is the truth of the universe itself. The springs have revealed the union of two souls, two beings from different worlds, drawn together by forces beyond their control. But this union is more than just a merging of fates. It is the fulfillment of a cosmic design." Valen's heart raced as the oracle's words sank in. The weight of her statement was overwhelming. This wasn't just a matter of law or tradition. This was destiny, an inescapable force that had guided them to this very moment. "The bond between you," the oracle continued, her eyes still fixed on Valen, "is not a mere accident. It is a catalyst for something much larger than either of you. You, Commander Blackwood, are not just an ambassador of Earth. You are a bridge between two worlds, two species, two fates. And this union, though born from an ancient law, has the power to change everything." Valen's thoughts raced. He had come to Zorathis to represent Earth, to negotiate, to understand. But now, he realized that his mission was far more than just diplomatic. It was a turning point in the history of both their worlds. A single glance, a single moment, had set in motion a series of events that neither he nor Aria could control. And yet, in the face of it all, he couldn't deny the truth of the oracle's words. There was something between them, something undeniable, something larger than either of them. And what of the future? Aria asked, her voice steady, but with a hint of desperation creeping in. What does the springs reveal about us? About what comes next? The oracle's gaze softened, and for the first time, there was a flicker of warmth in her eyes. The future is not set in stone. It is shaped by the choices you make, by the actions you take. But know this, the bond between you is not just the joining of two souls. It is the awakening of something ancient, something that has lain dormant for centuries. Your union will not just reshape your worlds, it will reshape the very fabric of the universe. You are destined to bring balance, to bring change. And though the path ahead will be fraught with challenges, know that you are not alone. The springs have revealed that you are connected not just to each other, but to everything that has come before you, and everything that will come after. Valen's mind spun with the weight of the oracle's words. Destiny. Fate. Balance. It was all too much to comprehend, too much to fully understand. And yet, as he stood there, in the presence of the oracle, he felt the truth of it deep in his bones. This wasn't just about him and Aria anymore. This was about something far larger, something that transcended their individual desires, their political obligations, their personal struggles. This was about a cosmic force that had been set into motion long before either of them had been born. We will face it together, Valen said, his voice steady with a newfound resolve. No matter what the future holds, we'll face it together. Aria turned to him, her eyes searching his face for a moment before she nodded, the weight of everything settling between them. She knew, as he did, that their journey had only just begun. The future was uncertain, filled with political intrigue, hidden agendas, and dangers they couldn't yet comprehend. But one thing was clear, the truth of their connection had been revealed by the springs. And no matter how impossible it seemed, they would walk this path together, facing whatever came next. The oracle's vision serves as a pivotal moment in the story, where everything that Valen and Aria have experienced so far, their connection, their love, and the overwhelming forces pulling at them, comes into sharp focus. What began as an accidental encounter is now revealed to be part of a larger, cosmic design. This revelation is not just about them, it's about the future of two worlds, the intertwining of destinies, and the awakening of something ancient that could reshape everything. The stakes have never been higher, and Valen and Aria are no longer just players in a political game, they are agents of change, bound by a force greater than themselves. The oracle's message also reminds us that while the future may be uncertain, the choices we make shape it. Valen and Aria may not know exactly what lies ahead, but they are no longer afraid. They are bound by the truth of their connection, and together, they will face whatever challenges come their way. This is not just a love story, it is a tale of destiny, of worlds colliding, and of the power of truth to bring about transformation. The palace was alive with anticipation as the news of Valen and Aria's union spread through the grand halls. The crystal walls pulsed with an energy that seemed to resonate with the very air itself, as if the entire palace was holding its breath, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Outside, the twin suns began their slow descent, casting long shadows across the landscape, their warm light flickering off the palace's spires like celestial flames. The world of Zorathis seemed to stand still, as if time itself had paused in reverence for what was about to happen. Valen could feel it too, the weight of what they had just done. The union between him and Aria had shifted the political landscape, torn open ancient laws and customs that had held their world in place for centuries. And yet, as he stood beside her, in the quiet before the storm, he couldn't help but feel that their bond was not just a rebellion against tradition, it was something more. Something that would change the future of both their worlds forever. Aria stood beside him, her hand gently resting on her abdomen, a quiet but constant reminder of the life that was growing within her. She looked at him with a mixture of determination and something else, something tender, something that made her seem even more vulnerable than the fierce, unyielding diplomat she had been since their first encounter. "We've already defied so much, Valen," she said softly, her voice carrying the weight of everything they had both sacrificed. But this, the child, we're about to create something that has never been seen before. Something that neither of our species could have ever imagined. Valen looked at her, feeling a surge of awe and something deeper, something unnameable. He had come to Zorathis as an outsider, someone trying to bridge the gap between two worlds. But now, standing at the precipice of a new era, he realized that this was no longer just a diplomatic mission. This was something more profound. Something that transcended both Earth and Zorathis. "You're right," Valen said, his voice rough with emotion. "This child, our child, it's not just a symbol of our union. It's a symbol of everything we've overcome, of everything we're about to create together." As they stood together in the quiet of the palace, Valen couldn't help but think of the implications of their bond. The oracle's words echoed in his mind. Their union was the fulfillment of a cosmic design, a design that had been written into the stars long before they had met. Their connection, born from ancient laws and traditions, had given birth to a new possibility, a future where human and Celestian could coexist, where their differences could be bridged, not by force or politics, but by love, by truth, by choice. But even as Valen felt the excitement of this new future begin to grow within him, he knew that there was no easy path ahead. The political forces that had tried to tear them apart, the factions within the Celestian court, the old bloodlines, the power-hungry noble houses, would not simply accept their union. Lord Cryon's bitterness, the jealousy of the lesser houses, the deep-seated fear of change, they would all fight against this new reality with everything they had. "The child we're having," Valen said, his voice quiet but firm, "isn't just the beginning of our family. It's the beginning of something far larger than us. This is going to change everything." Aria turned to him, her eyes soft but filled with an intensity that mirrored his own. "Yes," she said, her voice filled with conviction. "The child we're carrying isn't just a symbol of our love. It's a bridge. It's a bridge between our worlds, between the future we can build together, and the past we're leaving behind. Our child will be the first of a new era. A new era where we no longer see ourselves as separate, as enemies or strangers, but as one people, bound by the same truth." Valen felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from the weight of what they were saying. What Aria was saying. The child they were about to bring into the world would not just be a hybrid of two species. It would be the first of its kind, someone who carried the best of both Earth and Zorathis. Someone who would bridge the divide between their worlds, just as he and Aria had done. "This is bigger than us," Valen murmured, his hand instinctively reaching for hers. "It's bigger than just Zorathis and Earth. Our child, he or she, will carry the legacy of both worlds, of both our peoples. This child could change everything." Aria's eyes glistened with an emotion Valen couldn't quite place. There was pride in them, yes, but there was also something deeper, something that told him she, too, understood the magnitude of what they had created. Their bond, their love, had already defied the laws of their respective worlds. And now, they were creating a life that would embody the future, a future where differences would no longer divide, but unite. "I've always known that our people's laws were built on the past," Aria said softly, her voice tinged with something more reflective. "They were built to preserve the old ways, to protect the traditions that defined us. But sometimes, the old ways need to be challenged. Sometimes, the future demands something new, something untested." Valen squeezed her hand, his chest swelling with a deep, fierce pride. "And that's exactly what we're doing. We're challenging the old ways. We're creating something new." As they stood together, in the quiet of the palace, they both understood the enormity of their task. They were no longer just two individuals caught in the currents of fate. They were the architects of a new future. The child they were about to have would be the first of a new era, a new chapter in the history of both Earth and Zorathis. But that future wouldn't be easy. It wouldn't come without its struggles, its pain, its obstacles. The political factions that opposed their union would not back down easily. They would fight, they would scheme, and they would stop at nothing to preserve their old power. But Valen and Aria had something stronger, something more powerful, than the political machinery that sought to tear them apart. They had each other. And together, they had the power to change the world. "I don't know what's ahead of us," Valen said, his voice steady but filled with an undeniable sense of resolve. "But I do know this. I will fight for this future. I will fight for our child. I will fight for you." Aria's smile was soft but filled with a deep, quiet strength. "And I will fight beside you, Valen. Our future isn't just about survival. It's about creating something better. Something that will last long after we're gone." As they stood together, side by side, Valen couldn't help but feel that, despite the uncertainty of the road ahead, they were ready. They were ready to face whatever came next, together. Their child, their legacy, would be the bridge between their worlds, a symbol of everything they had fought for, everything they had overcome. And though the path would be fraught with challenges, Valen knew one thing for certain: the future was theirs to create. This chapter is where everything truly begins to shift. It's no longer about surviving the current political storm or navigating the complexity of Celestian and Earth cultures. It's about creating a new future, one where the past no longer holds them back. The child they are about to bring into the world is more than just a symbol of their love. It is a bridge between their two species, a beacon of hope for a new era. This is where Valen and Aria take the reins of their own fate. Together, they will shape the world to come, and their union will become the foundation of a future that transcends the boundaries of both Earth and Zorathis. As they embrace this new reality, there's a profound sense of empowerment, a recognition that the struggles they face are not just obstacles, they are the stepping stones toward a brighter, more unified future. The hybrid future they are creating isn't just about their child, it's about what their child represents, a new era, where two worlds finally come together.